The gun went off before anyone screamed. The sound cracked through the warm Los Angeles night like a bone snapping, sharp, final, irreversible, and Serafina Andolini dropped the tray she'd been carrying so hard that it bounced twice on the pavement outside Trattoria Luce before clattering into the gutter. She didn't run. That was the thing that would haunt her later, the thing she could never explain to the police, to her best friend Camille, to herself. She didn't run. She stood completely still in the alley behind the restaurant where she'd stepped out for a breath of air after a 6-hour shift, and she watched. 3 men in suits the color of midnight. 1 man on his knees on the concrete, hands behind his head, already bleeding from somewhere above his left ear. And the 4th man, the one holding the gun, standing with such impossible stillness that he didn't look like a person at all. He looked like architecture. Like something carved out of darkness and installed in the alley specifically to terrify her. He turned his head and looked directly at her. Don't move. Don't breathe. Don't exist. But it was too late. He'd already seen her. His name was Ezio Marcello Ferrante, and he was 27 years old, and he had never once in his life made a decision he regretted, until the moment he turned and saw the girl standing frozen at the end of the alley with paint-stained fingers and terror in her dark eyes, and felt something in his chest move that had been perfectly still for as long as he could remember. He handed the gun to Lorenzo without looking away from her. "Who is she?" he said quietly. His best man, Giovanni Sardo, had come around from behind the black SUV to stand at his shoulder. Gio was 32 and had seen everything there was to see in this world twice over. He turned and looked at the girl and then looked back at Ezio with an expression that was equal parts surprise and wariness. "No idea," Gio said. "She works here, maybe." "The restaurant." "Find out." "Ezio." "Her name." "Tonight." Ezio finally looked away from her, back at the man kneeling on the concrete, who had the good sense to be weeping quietly and not attempting anything stupid. "And finish this." He walked past the girl without stopping. He was close enough that she could have reached out and touched the sleeve of his jacket, black wool, Italian cut, $400 a button. He didn't look at her again. But as he passed, he said, quietly, almost gently, the way you'd speak to something fragile you were trying not to shatter. "Go inside. Lock the door. Forget you were ever out here." Serafina Andolini was 24 years old and had a degree in fine art from UCLA and worked Tuesday through Sunday at a restaurant that smelled like garlic and possibility, and she was not the kind of woman who did what she was told. But something in his voice moved through her like a current. She went inside. She told herself she'd call the police. She made it to the back kitchen, past the industrial dishwasher roaring and steaming, past Marco the line cook who was singing to himself in Spanish, and she stood over the sink with her phone in her hand and her thumb hovering over the 9. And she thought about his face. Not the fear of it, though she should have felt fear, she knew that, but the architecture of it. The jaw. The mouth that barely moved when he spoke. The eyes that were some color between gray and green that she would have called, if she were painting them, sea glass after a storm. She put her phone in her apron pocket. She picked up a tray of water glasses. She went back out to her tables. This was her first mistake. His name, Gio told him, was Serafina Andolini. 24. Artist. Renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Silver Lake with her best friend, a girl named Camille Ferry who worked in marketing and posted too much on social media. Serafina herself had an Instagram full of paintings, dark, vivid, violent with color, and she worked 4 shifts a week at Trattoria Luce to pay the rent while she built her portfolio. No criminal record. No mafia connections. No reason whatsoever to be standing in that alley at that exact moment except the worst possible luck. Ezio read all of this in the back of the car on the 40-minute drive to the Ferrante compound in Bel Air, and by the time they turned through the iron gates, he had made a decision that he also told himself he wouldn't regret. He was going to forget about her. She was a civilian. A witness to a clean job that was already being handled. Lorenzo would take care of the body. The alley camera had already been wiped. There was nothing to connect that moment to him, to the Ferrante family, to anything. She'd be fine. He went inside and poured himself 3 fingers of Barolo and stood at the window looking out at the city lights and thought about her paint-stained fingers. He lasted 48 hours. Before we go any further, if you've already forgotten what blinking feels like, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because this story is only getting darker from here, and I need you present for every second of it. She was at her easel when they came for her. Not men in suits this time, just one. A woman, which surprised her. Tall, red-haired, wearing slacks and a silk blouse, knocking on the door of the Silver Lake apartment on a Tuesday afternoon while Camille was at work and Serafina was 2 hours into trying to finish a commissioned piece of a Malibu coastline that she kept making too violent, too dark, the waves too hungry. Serafina Andolini, the woman said. Yes? My name is Renata. She didn't offer a last name. Mr. Ferrante would like to meet with you. Serafina felt the alley come back, the gun crack, the kneeling man, the still figure in the dark, and her hand tightened on the door frame. I don't know who that is, she said. Renata smiled with her teeth. He knows who you are. There were 2 men behind Renata, Serafina realized. She hadn't seen them at first because they were standing at the base of the stairwell with the particular stillness of people trained to be invisible until they aren't. Both of them were watching her with the patient, neutral attention of people who did not find this situation unusual in any way. Her mouth went dry. Am I being given a choice? She asked. Renata considered this with what seemed like genuine thoughtfulness. Mr. Ferrante said to tell you that you are. He also said to tell you that he hopes you'll make the right one. She made the wrong one. Or the right one. She was never sure afterward. She got in the car. The drive took 45 minutes, long enough for her heartbeat to go from roaring to something almost resigned, long enough for her to decide that if this was how she died, in the back of a black SUV on the way to meet the man from the alley, she was at least going to die without begging. The house was, she didn't have a word for it at first. Then she did, impossible. A compound behind iron gates at the end of a road that didn't appear on GPS, all white stone and dark glass and flowering bougainvillea climbing walls thick enough to stop bullets, and ground so manicured they looked painted, and an ocean view from the top terrace that made her breath catch even through the terror. An artist lived here, she thought. Or someone who understood that beauty was a weapon. She was taken through the front entrance, past a foyer with a painting she recognized, an original Caravaggio, the real thing, not a print, and the sight of it almost stopped her feet because she knew what that painting cost and what it meant that it was here, hanging in a private home, and into a sitting room where tall windows looked out over a garden and the city beyond and the sky, which was doing something extraordinary with the light, going amber and deep rose in the late afternoon, and she thought I want to paint this, which was possibly the most absurd thought she'd ever had. You like the Caravaggio? She turned. He was standing in the doorway she hadn't heard open. No suit jacket this time, just a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, dark trousers. She could see a tattoo on his right forearm, a cross with a rosary wrapped around it, detailed enough that she could see the individual beads, and below it, in Roman numerals, a date she didn't recognize. There were others, she could tell, the edge of something dark curling above the collar at his throat. He was, in person and in daylight, almost violently handsome in a way that seemed designed to be unfair. Strong jaw. That sea-glass gaze. A mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile so long ago the memory was gone. The light in that painting, Serafina said, because her voice had decided to work and apparently it had opinions, is technically impossible. Caravaggio used a single directional source and achieved this depth that nobody before or since has been able to replicate. Art historians have been arguing about his technique for 400 years. Something moved across his face. Very quickly. Almost too fast to name. Sit down, he said. I'd rather stand. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I'm Ezio Ferrante. I know. You did your research. You had someone knock on my door. I had 5 minutes in the car with a working phone before Renata politely suggested I might want to put it away. She folded her hands in front of her. I know who you are. I know what your family is. I know that the man in the alley was Dario Ruggieri, a low-level numbers runner for the Castellano family who'd been skimming for 6 months. I know that the camera in that alley was wiped by someone with professional access within an hour of what happened. The room was very quiet. You did thorough research, Ezio said. His voice hadn't changed. That was somehow more frightening than if it had. I'm a quick reader. And yet you got in the car. You said it was a choice. I chose to know what I was walking into. She met his eyes. I'd rather know the thing that might kill me than be surprised by it. He looked at her for so long that she felt it on her skin. Then he moved, not toward her, just to the side, to an armchair, which he sat in with the particular ease of someone who never sat anywhere that wasn't already his territory. I need to know, he said, what you're going to do. About what I saw. Yes. I'm not going to the police, she said. I thought about it. I didn't. She paused. I don't know why. I do, he said. Please don't explain my own psychology to me. The thing happened on his face again. Faster this time. Like a door opening and closing in a wind. Sit down, Serafina, he said. I'm not going to hurt you. You'd say that either way. Yes, he agreed, with what sounded like complete honesty. I would. But in this case it also happens to be true. She sat. He gave her dinner. This was not what she'd expected and she told him so, which made the woman who appeared from the kitchen, his aunt, Ezio told her, Donatella, 70 years old and 4'11" and possessed of exactly the demeanor of someone who had outlasted several empires, emit a sound of deep satisfaction and set down a bowl of rigatoni all'amatriciana that smelled like a religious experience. Ezio sat across from her at a table that could have seated 20 and ate in silence and watched her with the focused, evaluating patience of someone solving a problem. You paint, he said, eventually. I live, she said. I also paint. I've seen your work. She put her fork down. You looked me up. Of course. She stopped. It was invasive and frightening and also, she realized, faintly flattering in a way that horrified her. You had no right. I had no right to a great many things, he said, in a tone that suggested this had never once stopped him. The piece you posted 3 weeks ago. The one with the red. What were you painting? She picked up her fork again. A feeling. Which one? She looked at him across the table and thought about the night in the alley, about how time had stopped, about how she'd stood still while every sensible mechanism in her body screamed at her to run, and she said, the moment before something changes. When you can feel the before ending and you can't see the after yet. Just, the edge of it. He was very still. Yes, he said, quietly. I've seen that feeling. She expected to be sent home that night. She was taken instead to a guest room on the 2nd floor, white walls, white linens, a window that looked out over the city and couldn't be opened from the inside, and when she tried the door after Renata left, it was not precisely locked. But it required a keycard that she didn't have. She sat on the bed for a while. Then she went to the window and looked out at Los Angeles at night, all that electric sprawl, her city, Camille's city, the city she'd painted from a dozen angles and a dozen different emotional weathers, and she thought about Ezio Ferrante's face when she'd described that painting, and she thought. I am in a great deal of trouble. She found out how much trouble on the 3rd morning. Gio came to tell her, because Ezio hadn't. Ezio was, she'd learned in 3 days, a man who sent other people to do things he considered unpleasant not out of cowardice but out of precision. He deployed people the way other people deployed tools, efficiently and without sentiment. Gio was compact and dark-haired with a scar through his left eyebrow and tired eyes and what appeared, underneath the professionalism, to be a genuine capacity for human feeling that he kept very carefully controlled. He sat across from her in the garden where she'd been given sketchbooks and charcoal. Ezio had provided them without being asked, which had disturbed her more than almost anything else, and he said, "The Castellano family knows someone witnessed what happened to Ruggieri." She went still. "They don't know it's you specifically," Gio continued. "Yet. But they've been putting pressure on the restaurant staff. It's only a matter of time before someone gives them a description. And a description leads to me." "Yes. Which means if I go home, the Castellanos will find you before our people can protect you." He said it without embellishment, which made it worse. "They don't leave witnesses, Serafina. It's a business policy." The sketchbook was in her lap. She'd been drawing his hands, she realized, Joe's hands, resting on his knees, without thinking about it, the automatic artist's compulsion to record the world. She looked down at the drawing. "And Ezio's solution is to keep me here. Ezio's solution is to keep you alive. Those are two different things." Gio looked at her with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite respect and was somewhere between the two. "In this world," he said, "sometimes they're the same." She went to Ezio directly. This required getting past Renata, who tried to tell her he was in a meeting. Serafina walked through the meeting. It was in the study, 4 men in chairs, maps on the table, voices that stopped the moment she pushed the door open, and she walked in and stood in the middle of it and looked at Ezio across the table and said, "You can't keep me here." The 4 men looked at her. Then they looked at Ezio. Ezio looked at her with that sea-glass gaze and said, "To the room, give us a moment." The men left with the obedient speed of people who had learned that his moments were not suggestions. "Serafina. I have a life," she said. "I have a job, an apartment, a best friend who is currently losing her mind because I sent her one text saying I was safe and then went dark for 3 days. I have a gallery showing in 6 weeks that I've been working toward for 8 months. You cannot make me." "The Castellano family," Ezio said, his voice very quiet, "will cut off your hands." She stopped. "That's their particular, they have a practice, with artists, with people they find, they have a practice." He said it without theatrical emphasis, which made it the most terrifying thing she'd ever heard. "Not because it's personal. Because it sends a message. And then they'll kill you." Her heart was doing something loud and dysfunctional. "So." He was watching her face with that focused, solving attention. "You can be angry with me. That's fine. But you cannot leave this house until the situation is resolved." "Resolved," she said. "What does that mean?" He held her gaze for a long beat. "It means," he said, "that I'm going to make sure it never becomes a problem for you again." She understood, in that moment, exactly what he meant. And she understood something else, too, something she didn't want to understand, something that frightened her more than the Castellanos or the locked windows or any of it. She understood that she believed him. She negotiated. This seemed to genuinely surprise him, which she found privately satisfying. She told him she would stay, not because he was making her, but because she was choosing to, and she needed him to understand the difference, and in exchange she had conditions. 1. Camille would be told she was safe, by phone, today. 2. Her painting supplies would be brought from the apartment, all of them, including the large canvases that would be a nuisance to transport, and that was not her problem. 3. She would have a phone. Not free access to the internet, she understood the concern, but a phone that could call Camille. He agreed to all 3 without negotiation. This also surprised her. "You expected me to argue," he said. "You're not used to people making demands of you." "No. Does it bother you?" He considered this with what seemed like genuine curiosity about his own reaction. "No," he said, and seemed slightly puzzled by it. The painting supplies arrived that afternoon in Ezio's car, 3 trips, including, to her shock, the large half-finished Malibu canvas she'd been working on. Renata helped carry things up to the East Wing room that was designated as her studio space, a large white-walled room with north-facing light that Serafina would have killed for under normal circumstances. She stood in it, surrounded by her own colors and materials, and felt something complicated. Like the inside of her chest had rearranged itself in a way she couldn't map yet. She called Camille. Camille shrieked for approximately 2 minutes solid, then subsided into something worse, the particular low, controlled voice Camille used when she was genuinely frightened and trying not to show it. Serafina told her as much of the truth as she could without specifics. She was safe. She was somewhere safe. She'd explain when she could. She loved her. "Are you safe?" Camille asked. Very quietly. Serafina looked at the north light coming through the window, at the skyline outside, at the Malibu canvas propped against the wall. "Yes," she said. And found, confusingly, that she meant it. He came to the studio that evening. She heard him at the door, a knock, which she hadn't expected, which she understood was deliberate, and she said come in without looking up from the palette she was mixing, a particular shade of dark green she couldn't quite land. He came in and stood behind her for a while without speaking. "That's not Malibu," he said. "No. You changed it. I was wrong about it before." She stepped back and looked at what she'd done. The canvas had stopped being a coastline and become something else, something darker and more honest, waves that looked less like water and more like consequence. Sometimes you start painting something and it tells you what it actually wants to be. He was close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, a fact her body noted without her permission. She could see, in her peripheral vision, the rosary tattoo on his forearm. The date in Roman numerals. March 6th, she said, before she could stop herself. He went still. "The date," she said. "On your arm." A silence. "My brother," he said. "Matteo. He died when I was 19. She turned then, because she couldn't not. He was looking at the painting, not at her, and his expression was, not soft, not broken, but open in some way that she thought probably very few people ever saw. "I'm sorry," she said. He was in this life, Ezio said. It wasn't, he knew the risks. That doesn't make it less of a loss. He looked at her. That door-opening thing again, faster and faster every time. "No," he said. "It doesn't." 3 days became 5. 5 became a week. She found herself learning the rhythms of the house, the morning espresso that Donatella made and which was, without contest, the best coffee Serafina had ever tasted, the afternoon when the business of the Ferrante empire filtered through in a stream of visitors and phone calls and closed-door meetings from which voices sometimes rose in Italian and sometimes fell into silences more frightening than the shouting, the evenings when, after everyone else had cleared out, Ezio would sometimes appear in the doorway of her studio and stand there in a way that could have been supervision but felt like something else. She learned the tattoos, incrementally. The rosary cross. A family crest on his left shoulder blade, she'd glimpsed it once when his shirt had ridden up, a crowned eagle above a Latin phrase she didn't have time to read. His knuckles, the right hand spelled honor across 4 fingers, honor, she translated without difficulty. The left hand had something older and more worn, a tattoo from before, she guessed, the family signet ring he wore over it now partly concealing the letters. She learned that he drank good wine and bad coffee. That he ate every dinner at the same long table, alone now that she refused to join him, which she did for the first week for the same reason she'd refused to sit down on the first day, because every normal thing she accepted in this house was another brick in a wall around a life she hadn't chosen. She lasted 8 days. On the 9th night, she sat across from him at the long table and ate Donatella's osso buco and didn't speak for 20 minutes, and then found herself telling him about her mother, who had also been an artist, who had died when Serafina was 16, who had left behind 43 paintings and a box of charcoal stubs and a daughter who sometimes felt like she was only making art to keep having a reason to call herself her mother's child. She didn't mean to say any of it. He listened without interrupting, which was the most violent thing he'd done to her yet. The first crack came from outside. A Castellano man had been seen near the Silver Lake apartment. Gio told her this with the particular care of someone delivering bad news precisely, and Camille had been moved to a hotel under a name that wasn't hers, and the Ferrante soldiers assigned to watch the building had been doubled. Camille doesn't know why, Gio said. She knows something's wrong. She's safe. Safe isn't the same as, Serafina stopped. She'd said this before. She wondered if Gio was starting to find it as ironic as she was. She went to Ezio. She'd started doing this, when she was scared or angry or had something that needed saying, she went directly to the source, which was not her normal mode of operation and which she suspected was Ezio's influence, this place where everything was direct and the subtext was just threat. She found him on the terrace that faced the city, a glass of wine in his hand, jacket off, the white shirt open at the collar, and the evening LA sky doing its irresponsible best behind him, and she walked up and stood next to him at the railing and said, without preamble, "I need this to end." "I know. Camille is scared. She doesn't deserve." "I know." He turned to look at her. In the low gold light he looked younger, or not younger exactly, but less armored. Like the light was doing something to him that the house interior couldn't. "I'm working on it." "Working on it has a timeline?" He looked back at the city. "The Castellano Don has a meeting with his consigliere next Thursday in Vegas. I'll be there." She understood what that meant. She was learning to understand things in this language. "And after?" "After," he said, "there's no more reason for them to be looking for witnesses to something that no longer has a primary party interested in pursuing it." She gripped the railing. "Is that not what you wanted?" he asked. "I don't know what I wanted," she said, which was truer than almost anything she'd ever said. He looked at her then, fully, and she didn't look away, and the city spread out below them in every direction like a painting that had gotten too big for its canvas, and she felt the edge again, that feeling she'd tried to put into paint, the before ending, the after not yet visible, and she thought, "This is it. This is the edge." His hand moved to hers on the railing. Not taking it. Just covering it. The warmth of his palm over the back of her hand, and the calluses she hadn't expected, and the signet ring cool against her skin. "Serafina," he said. Her name in his mouth sounded like something else. Like a word in a language she was only now starting to understand. "Don't," she said. Softly. "Not yet." He lifted his hand. But he didn't move away. "Let me be clear about something. She knows what he is. She knows what he does. And she's still standing next to him on that terrace letting his hand cover hers like it's the most natural thing in the world. You probably have opinions about that. Good. Hold them. Subscribe first, because people who think they know how this ends are the ones most spectacularly wrong about it. I'll wait. The betrayal came from inside the house. She'd been there 16 days when she found the folder. It wasn't left out carelessly, she was certain of that later, almost certain, almost, but she'd been looking for a charcoal pencil she'd left in the study, and the folder was on the corner of the desk, and it was labeled in Joe's handwriting with her name. Andolini, S. Asset Management. She should have put it down. She opened it. There were photographs, surveillance photographs, from before she'd come to the compound, from before any of this, of her at the restaurant, at the apartment building, at a gallery opening she'd attended 2 months ago. Dated 3 weeks before the night in the alley. She stared at them for a long time. Then she read the documents underneath. The Ferrante family had a long-running conflict with a gallery owner, a man named Brescia who had been laundering money for a rival through a network of high-end art sales. The FBI had been investigating the gallery for 8 months. The gallery had recently expressed interest in 3 emerging artists for a group showing. Serafina was one of them. The document, Joe's document, his handwriting throughout, assessed the probability that Trattoria Luce had been specifically chosen for the Ruggieri execution because of its proximity to her building. Because making her a witness had value. Because a frightened civilian artist with a connection to a gallery under FBI investigation could be used. The last page was in a different hand. Neater. More deliberate. Confirm approach. EF. Ezio Ferrante. Dated 4 days before the night in the alley. She walked out of the study with the folder under her arm and through the house and up the stairs and into her studio, and she stood in the middle of her colors and her canvases, and she felt the walls of the past 16 days reconstruct themselves into something entirely different. Not a refuge. A trap. She wasn't a witness he was protecting. She was a piece he was positioning on a board she hadn't known she was playing on. The dinner. The Caravaggio. The studio with north-facing light. The way he listened. The terrace, and his hand over hers, and her name in his mouth. Asset management. She picked up a brush. She didn't paint. She held it so hard her knuckles went white. And then she did something she hadn't done since her mother died. She cried. Not prettily. Just thoroughly. Standing in the middle of a studio in a house that wasn't hers, surrounded by art that was the truest thing about her, and cried until the tears ran out, and what was left was something harder and colder and more useful. Rage. He came to the studio an hour later and she let him knock twice before she said come in, and she was standing in front of the canvas she'd been working on, the one that used to be Malibu, the one, the honest dark version, with her back to the door. You saw the folder, he said. Was that intentional? A pause. No. But the rest was. Another pause. Longer. She appreciated that he didn't try to deny it, that he apparently couldn't perform innocence even when it might have helped him. Yes, he said. She turned. His face was, she catalogued it with the merciless precision she used on things she was trying to paint accurately, not guilty, not defensive. Something worse. Something that looked like a man who had committed a wrong and was making no effort to minimize it. The gallery, she said. Brescia. You wanted a civilian in the investigation. Someone the FBI would want to flip. Someone who'd be scared enough to be cooperative. Yes. Me. You were already connected to the gallery. The showing was already in discussion. All I needed was for you to be frightened and grateful and, yes. He said it flat and precise and brutal. That was the original plan. Her hands were shaking. She put them behind her back. And now, she said. He walked toward her, not fast, not aggressive, but deliberately, the way he did everything, and stopped 2 feet away, which was close enough. Now it's different, he said. Why? Because I know you now. He said it like it was simple. Like it was the simplest thing in the world. That's not a reason, Ezio, that's. I know, he said. It's not enough. I know that. His jaw was tight. I'm telling you anyway because you deserve the truth more than I deserve your forgiveness. She looked at him for a long, scorching moment. The plan, she said. What happens to it now? I'll find another way to handle Brescia. The FBI investigation. Not your problem anymore. And me. His eyes didn't move from hers. Still my problem, he said, very quietly. Still my responsibility. The Castellanos don't know the original objective changed. They're still coming. So I'm still trapped here. Yes. But now I know why. Yes. She breathed in. Out. She felt the rage still there under her breastbone, hot and clarifying. And underneath it, something she had no right to feel and felt anyway, this horrible, irrational, traitorous something that had been building for 16 days and wouldn't lie down even now, even knowing. Get out of my studio, she said. He went. She didn't speak to him for 2 days. This was more difficult than it should have been. She worked. She painted with a ferocity she hadn't found in years. The anger turned out to be the best thing that had happened to the Malibu Not Malibu canvas, which was now a full-scale reckoning with something she couldn't name yet, something large and dark and also, annoyingly, alive. Donatella brought her food. Gio came once and sat outside the studio door and said through the wood that she had every right to be furious and that it was also true that Ezio had spent the past 8 days actively sabotaging his own original plan because he didn't want to use her. He could have sent you home, Gio said. Once the Castellanos escalated, he had enough leverage with the gallery investigation to make the FBI approach independently. He didn't need you anymore. He kept you here because... Don't, she said. Through the door. A silence. All right, Gio said. But eat the arancini. Donatella made them specifically for you. She ate the arancini. You know what the wildest thing about this story is? She's angrier at herself than at him. Because she looked at that folder and her first feeling, before the betrayal, before the rage, was that she already knew. Something in her already knew this wasn't an accident. And she'd stayed anyway. If you've ever chosen someone you shouldn't have and then found out there was a reason you were in the same room and still couldn't make yourself leave, subscribe. Because Serafina is about to make a decision that will change everything, and you are not going to see it coming. She came down to dinner on the 3rd night. He was already at the table. He looked up when she came in and then looked back at his plate, which told her he'd been waiting and was not going to admit it. She sat down. Donatella appeared from the kitchen with the speed of someone who had been listening for footsteps and brought 2 bowls of something that smelled like Sunday mornings and forgiveness, and then disappeared again. They ate in silence for a while. The Vegas meeting, Serafina said finally. When is it? 3 days. And after that, it's over. For you. Yes. What does that mean, for you? He put his fork down. The Castellano situation has broader implications for the family. It won't end with one meeting. I'm not asking about the family. He looked at her. I'm asking about you, she said. After. What does your life look like? A long silence. The same as before, he said. Before what? He picked up his wine glass. Didn't drink from it. Set it down. Before you were standing in the alley. She felt that low in her chest. I was someone else's leverage, she said. I need to know that clearly. Yes. And you felt something that made you not want to do that anymore. Yes. And you think those 2 things can exist at the same time? The using and the whatever else. He looked at her directly. No, he said. I don't think they can. Which is why I stopped the first one. Ezio. She said his name and felt his focus sharpen on her immediately, completely, the way it always did. This particular quality of attention that she now recognized was something he gave to almost no one, and which was, she'd learned to her significant inconvenience, extraordinarily difficult to be on the receiving end of without responding to it. If I walk out of here after Thursday. After it's over. What do you want to happen? A silence so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. I want, he said, slowly, like each word was a door he was deciding whether to open, for you to come back. To this house. To me. She looked at him across the long table, across the wine glasses and the candlelight and 16 days of impossible accumulation, and she thought about what it meant to want something that complicated, something that dangerous, something that came wrapped in this much harm. I don't know if I can do that, she said. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to decide now. She went back to the studio. She stood in front of the canvas for a long time without touching it. Then she picked up a brush and mixed a color she'd been unable to find for weeks, that particular deep red, the color of something that had crossed a line it couldn't uncross, and she made a mark. The shift happened fast, the way everything in this world happened, no warning, immediate consequence. One of Ezio's soldati, a young man named Nico who Serafina had seen twice in the hallway and who had always nodded at her with the respectful awkwardness of someone who didn't know what category she fell into, was found in the Ferrante garage at 4 a.m. with a burner phone containing messages to a Castellano contact. She heard the commotion. She shouldn't have left her room. She did. From the second-floor landing she could see into the main hall, Gio and two others, and Nico standing in the center of the room with his hands at his sides and his face the color of paper, and Ezio in front of him. Ezio wasn't shouting. That was the thing. His voice was so quiet she could barely hear it from the landing, and the men around Nico looked more frightened than Nico did, because they knew what the quiet meant. "What did you tell them?" Ezio said. "Only that she was here. Only her name. Yes. Her connection to the gallery." A pause. "Yes." The silence that followed was so absolute she could hear her own heartbeat. "Take him downstairs," Ezio said. Still quiet. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Serafina gripped the railing. Ezio looked up. He found her immediately, not searching, just knowing where to look, and they stared at each other across the height of the foyer, the chandelier between them, the house rearranging itself around the gravity of what had just happened. "Go back to your room," he said. "Ezio. Please." And the please was so unexpected, this word from this man in this context, that it stopped her entirely. "I need you to go back to your room." She went. He came to her door 2 hours later. She'd been sitting on the bed with her sketchbook in her lap, not drawing, just holding it, when she heard the knock. She opened the door. He looked, not shaken, exactly. Not undone. But like something that had been drawn very tight had been held too long at that tension. His knuckles, the honor hand, were freshly cleaned, but she could see the slight swelling that meant he hadn't only been talking. "Nico," she said. "Is alive," Ezio said. "He'll stay that way." He was 22 and scared, and they found his mother. His voice she heard something in it. Something that was not pride or satisfaction. They found his mother and told him what would happen to her if he didn't cooperate. She stepped back from the door. He came in. He sat in the chair by the window. She sat on the end of the bed and looked at him and thought about 22 and scared and a mother and the way the world pressed down on people in this life and ground them into shapes they'd never meant to be. He told them her name, Serafina said. "My connection to the gallery. They know why I matter." "Yes. So the Vegas meeting has to happen tomorrow," he said. "Not Thursday. Tomorrow." She understood what that meant, in terms of pace and risk and the violence of shortened preparation. She saw it in his face, the calculation, the controlled urgency. "Let me come," she said. He looked at her like she'd said something in a language he needed a moment to translate. "Absolutely not. I have a connection to Brescia. The gallery. If this is about the art angle, if they know that's why I matter, I can be useful. You'd be a target. I'm already a target. At least in Vegas I'd be your target, and that seems to come with better security." She held his gaze. "I'm not asking to be in the room. I'm asking to stop feeling like a package you're storing until this is resolved." A long silence. "You have no idea what you're walking into," he said. "I have better ideas than you think," she said. "I've been in this house for 18 days. I'm not naive about your world anymore, Ezio." He was quiet for what felt like a long time. "You stay with Renata," he said finally. "At all times. You don't go anywhere without telling someone. If I say get out, you get out without asking why." "Agreed." "And you're angry with me," he said. "I know. There's time for that. But not in Vegas. I can compartmentalize." He studied her face with that focused attention. "Yes," he said, quietly. "I believe you can." Vegas was everything she'd expected and nothing she was prepared for. They arrived at 11 p.m., 3 black cars, 7 of Ezio's people, Renata at Serafina's side like an elegant shadow. The hotel was the kind of place where the lobby ceiling was a painting of heaven and the front desk staff had been trained to see nothing remarkable in whatever came through the doors. Their suite took up the top floor. The city below was a fever dream, a hallucination in neon, and Serafina stood at the window and felt like she was looking at a painting she was inside of. Ezio moved through it all with the calibrated ease of a man in his most natural environment. She watched him work a room she hadn't been supposed to see, the pre-meeting gathering in the penthouse suite, Ferrante men and a delegation from a neutral third party, a Chicago family serving as arbiters, and she saw what she'd been seeing in pieces for 3 weeks, assembled finally into a whole. He was extraordinary at this. Not the violence, though that was there, coiled and present underneath everything. But the intelligence of it. The way he read a room. The way he made every person in it feel that they had his specific and total attention. The way he said less than anyone else and was heard more. The way power moved around him like weather. She understood, watching him, why it was so difficult to be angry with him. Not because the anger wasn't justified. It absolutely was. But because he was also, in the same body, in the same life, the man who had provided north-facing light for her studio and said her name like it was a word in a language he was only beginning to learn. Both things were true. This was the problem. The meeting with the Castellano representatives was scheduled for 9 the next morning. At 2 a.m., Gio called Ezio's phone. Serafina was in the second bedroom of the suite, awake because she couldn't sleep, sketching the view from the window, and she heard Ezio's voice through the wall, not the words, just the tone, and the tone was wrong, a register she hadn't heard before, something lower and more controlled than even his usual control, which meant the news was significant. She put the sketchbook down. She was at the connecting door when he knocked on it from his side. She opened it. His face told her before he did. "Camille," she said. Her voice came out flat. A stone hitting water. "What?" "She's safe," he said immediately, and her heart resumed. "She is safe." But she went back to the apartment, to get things. She didn't tell the men outside she was going. She was grabbed. For 20 minutes. They let her go. He watched her absorb this with that careful attention. It was a message to me, not a threat to her. They let her go with a phone number and a message. What message? His jaw was tight. That they want you. Not as a witness. Not about the gallery. Something changed. Nico told them more than he told us, or they connected other threads. They know about the original plan, Serafina. They know I was going to use you as an FBI contact. They think you've already been talking. To the FBI? Yes. The room was very still. But I haven't, she said. I know that. They think I'm an informant. Yes. She thought about Camille in some dark place for 20 minutes, not knowing why. She thought about Camille's voice on the phone, "Are you safe?" and how she'd said yes. Something went cold in her chest. Not fear. Colder than fear. "And this," she said. Tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. She held his gaze and she didn't look away from the cold thing, she looked straight through it at him. "I don't care what it costs. End it." He looked at her for a long moment. "The meeting was at 9 tomorrow," he said. "Move it." "Serafina. You told me that if you say get out, I get out without asking why." She took a step toward him. "I'm telling you, they touched my best friend. Move the meeting." His face moved through something complicated and arrived somewhere she hadn't seen on it before, not capitulation, not command. Something between them. Something that looked, she thought, like equals. "Gio," he said, not looking away from her. "Call Castellano. Tell them we meet at 4. She wasn't in the meeting room. She was 3 floors down in a hotel bar with Renata, drinking water because she was too tightly wound for alcohol, sketching on a cocktail napkin because her hands wouldn't stay still, and she didn't know what was happening upstairs except through the quality of Renata's silences, which were professional and revealed nothing. At 5:47 a.m. Ezio appeared in the bar entrance. He looked intact. That was the first thing. No visible damage. His suit jacket was gone but the shirt was clean. He walked to where she was sitting and he put both hands flat on the table and he looked at her and he said, "It's over." She put down the pencil. "Camille is safe. The Castellano Consigliere has agreed that the family has no interest in pursuing the witness situation in exchange for certain territorial adjustments. The gallery situation will be handled through other channels. There's no more reason for anyone to look for you." She breathed. "Once. Twice. Gio is arranging a car to take you home," he said. "Tonight, if you want. Or morning. Whenever you're ready." She looked at him across the table, at this man who had pulled her into something terrible and then stepped in front of it for her, who had planned to use her and then stopped, who had listened when she demanded the meeting moved and had moved it, who had his brother's death date tattooed on his arm and his mother's rigatoni recipe apparently memorized by heart, and she thought, "This is the edge again." "What do you want?" she said. He straightened. The bar was empty except for them and Renata, who had developed an urgent interest in something on the far side of the room. The pre-dawn light coming through the windows was a very particular shade of blue-gray that she would later identify, when she was trying to paint it, as the color of a door about to open. "I want what I told you I wanted," he said. "I'm not going to ask again." She went home in the morning. The Silver Lake apartment was exactly as she'd left it, Camille's throw blanket on the couch, the dishes she'd been meaning to do still in the sink, her easel in the corner of the living room with a small canvas she'd abandoned 6 weeks ago because she couldn't find the feeling she was after. She found the feeling now. Camille was already there. She opened the door and grabbed Serafina and held on, and Serafina held back, and they stayed like that for long enough that the tight thing in Serafina's chest, the thing that had been coiled up for 3 weeks, began to ease. "Okay," Camille said finally, pulling back to look at her. "Tell me everything." So she did. Not everything, exactly, there were things she couldn't say for reasons she didn't fully understand, some of which were practical and some of which were more interior and harder to name. But she told Camille about the alley and the house and the north-facing light and the Caravaggio and the folder with her name on it and Ezio's face when he said "I know," and "it's not enough." Camille was silent for a long time when she finished. "So he used you," Camille said. "And then stopped." "Yes." "And then kept you safe." "Yes." "And then moved a meeting in the middle of the night because they grabbed me." "Yes." Camille looked at her. "Fina. What do you want?" And Serafina, who had asked that question twice in the past week and only known how to direct it outward, felt it turn around and land somewhere internal. She went back to her painting. Not the Malibu one, that was still at the compound, still unfinished, still wanting to become something she hadn't figured out yet. She worked on other things. She went back to the restaurant. She called her gallery contact and confirmed the showing date and started working toward it with a seriousness that the past 6 weeks had somehow clarified, all that fear and anger and complicated feeling distilled into a vision she could actually execute. She didn't call him. He didn't call her. She counted the days in a way she told herself she wasn't doing and which she was absolutely doing. 12 days after Vegas, she walked into a gallery opening for a photographer she admired and Ezio Ferrante was standing in front of a large-format photograph of a woman in a red dress standing in the ocean and the water was dark and the sky was darker and the woman was looking at the horizon like she was deciding whether to swim toward it or away. He didn't see her immediately. She saw him first, the dark suit, the tattoos visible at the edge of his collar, the stillness that marked him in any room, and she felt the current again, that low electrical thing that had nothing to do with decision and everything to do with something more fundamental than that. She walked to him. He looked up when she was 3 steps away. His face did the thing. "Serafina," he said. "This one's about leaving," she said, nodding at the photograph. "Or staying. The critic can't decide which." He looked at it. "Which is it?" "Staying," she said, without hesitation. "Look at her feet. She's planted. She's not leaving. She's deciding to stay even though it's dangerous to. The image is about choosing something you know could drown you." He looked at her. I finished the canvas, she said. The Malibu one. You had it with you. Gio brought my things back. You probably knew that. She tilted her head. Are you going to ask me what it became? What did it become? Come see it. He came the next morning. Silver Lake, the apartment, Camille conspicuously not present, a fact about which Serafina did not ask questions. The finished canvas was propped against the wall of the living room and she stood back and looked at it the way she hadn't been able to when she was still inside it. It was the most honest thing she'd ever made. Not the coastline. Not dark waves. Something that looked, she'd been told by two people who'd seen it, like two forces meeting. Like a collision that was also somehow a rest point. Violent color, reds and deep blues and that particular green she'd finally found, that sea glass after a storm color, and in the center of it something that wasn't quite still and wasn't quite motion, a held breath. Ezio stood in front of it for a long time. You painted this here, he said. The last third, yes. After Vegas. She watched his face. What do you see? He was quiet. She'd learned to value his silences, they weren't absence, they were density. I see, he said, slowly, something that knows it's going to hurt and chose to do it anyway. She felt that so precisely it was almost physical. Yes, she said. He turned. I did something, she said. Before I came to the gallery last night. I want to tell you. He waited. I went to Brescia, she said. The gallery owner. Not the FBI, Brescia himself. She saw his jaw tighten and kept going. I told him that the showing I'd been offered had a condition. That he settled the questions around the gallery finances, publicly, through his own lawyers, no FBI involvement, or I pulled out of the show and went to his three most important collectors and told them what I knew. The silence was extremely dense. Serafina. He agreed by end of business. His lawyers filed yesterday. She held his gaze. I didn't do it for you. I did it because he was dirty and it was in my power to address it and I didn't want to do it through channels that would complicate things for the people involved. She paused. But also, a little, for you. He crossed the room in 3 steps and she didn't back away and his hands were on her face, both of them, cupping her jaw, his thumbs at her cheekbones, and he said her name once, just that, Serafina, in that voice that was her name and something else at the same time. You are, he said, very close, the most dangerously capable person I have ever met. Good, she said. Then we're somewhat matched. He kissed her like it was the end of an argument. Not soft, nothing about Ezio Ferrante was soft, she knew that, she wasn't expecting soft, but present. Fully present, the way his attention was always full, no performance in it, no calculation, just the entire specific weight of him choosing this moment and her in it. His hands in her hair. Her fingers at his collar, the tattoos beneath her fingertips. She pulled back before it went further. I need to say something, she said. Say it. I'm not yours. She held his gaze. Not in the way your world means that. I'm not property. I'm not an asset. I'm not a woman in a compound waiting for you to decide I can leave. His jaw was tight. I know. Do you? Yes. He said it with certainty but also, she saw it, with the awareness that certainty was easy to claim and hard to maintain. I know that what I offered you to start with was wrong. I know that the only reason you're here is because you chose to come. I know, he stopped. Reorganized. I know I don't deserve you already deciding to trust me again. I know I have to earn that. Yes, she said. And I know that earning it looks different in my world than it might in other people's. Yes, she said again. Which means I need you to know that I'm not naive about your world. I'm not going to spend our life pretending you're something you're not. I'm also not going to spend it being afraid of you. She held his gaze. Those are my conditions. Something in his face shifted, that quality she'd started to know, the door opening and this time staying open. Those, he said, I can accept. The gallery show opened on a Thursday in April. Serafina Andolini's work occupied the east wall, 7 large pieces, the Malibu Not Malibu canvas as the centerpiece, her name in clean sans serif on the white placard beside each one. The showing sold out in the pre-sale. The LA Times art critic came. 2 museum curators came. A collector from New York with a very long name and a very large collection came and stood in front of the center canvas for 12 minutes, which Serafina knew because she counted. Ezio came. He stood in the back of the gallery in a dark suit that cost more than the monthly rent on the Silver Lake apartment, and he didn't talk to anyone, and he watched her work the room with the particular pride of someone who understood that what they were watching was entirely not about them, and valued it precisely for that reason. She was talking to the Times critic, a woman named Delacroix who had opinions about color theory that were mostly wrong in the most interesting possible ways, when she saw the man across the room. She knew him. Not personally. But she knew his face from the documents she'd read in Ezio's study, from the research she'd done in the car on that first 45-minute drive, from the understanding she'd built over weeks of living inside this world. Marco Castellano. The son. The heir. The one who'd sent his men to Camille's apartment. The one whose family had decided she was an informant and needed to be handled. He was standing in front of her painting. He was smiling. Not at the painting. At her. She excused herself from Delacroix with the smooth competence of someone who had spent years managing difficult restaurant customers and crossed the room to Ezio's side and said, very quietly, looking at a painting she wasn't looking at. Marco Castellano is here. Ezio didn't look. I know, he said, equally quiet. He arrived 6 minutes ago. You knew he'd come. I suspected. She processed this. This is a test, she said. It's a message, Ezio said. He's establishing that he knows where you are. That the Vegas arrangement neutralized the immediate threat but didn't eliminate his interest. In me. In leverage over me. The art on the walls. The packed gallery. The Times critic. Camille across the room in a yellow dress talking to a sculptor Serafina had introduced her to. All of it suddenly felt like a set, like scenery. What happens, she said, if I walk over there? He finally looked at her. Why would you? Because he came to a gallery opening to look at my work and send you a message, she said. And I'm done being the message. I want to be the sender. A pause. Serafina. He doesn't know that I know what I know, she said. He thinks I'm a scared civilian artist who got tangled in something above her. He doesn't know I read those files. He doesn't know what I did with Brescia. He doesn't know that when his men grabbed Camille, I was the one who told Ezio to move the meeting. That's exactly why you shouldn't. Or, she said, it's exactly why I should. He looked at her. Long measuring. And then, slowly, his mouth did something she'd been waiting weeks to see it do properly. He almost smiled. Don't say anything about territory or business, he said. I was going to talk about art, she said. She walked across the room. Marco Castellano was 31, handsome in the way of men who had never been told no, with dark eyes and a suit almost as good as Ezio's and the particular smile of someone who expected to be the most dangerous thing in any room. He watched her come toward him with interest and not a trace of concern. Ms. Andolini, he said. This piece is extraordinary. Thank you. She stood next to him and looked at the canvas. What do you see in it? He tilted his head. Conflict, he said. Power. Something that wants to be controlled but can't be. Interesting, she said. Most people see resolution. The moment after the storm. He looked at her. It's remarkable, isn't it? How two people can look at the same thing and see entirely different stories. It is, she agreed. I find it useful, actually. When someone tells you what they see in a painting, they're usually telling you something true about themselves. His smile adjusted itself. Just slightly. And what am I telling you? That you came here tonight to be seen. She kept her voice light, professional, the voice she used on difficult customers and interesting strangers and now, apparently, on men who had sent people to grab her best friend. Not to look at art. To be seen by a specific person. A silence. He's watching, Marco said. He's always watching, she said. That's not new information. What's new is that I'm not scared of what you're trying to do. You came to remind him that you can find me. That is whatever I am can be a vulnerability. She turned and looked at him directly. I'm not a vulnerability, Mr. Castellano. I'm an artist who had an unfortunate night and has since had quite a thorough education in exactly who and what everyone around me is. Including you. He was still smiling. But the smile had changed in a way that was more honest. The Ferrante heir has an interesting taste in women, he said. He does, she agreed pleasantly. I'm going to go back to my guests now. I hope you enjoy the show. She paused, turning slightly. The piece in the far left corner isn't for sale. In case you were considering making an offer. Some things aren't available at any price. She walked away. She felt his eyes on her back the whole way across the room. Ezio was at her side in 30 seconds. What did you say to him? He said. I told him the piece on the left isn't for sale. A pause. Serafina. He came to remind you that I'm accessible. She picked up a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and took a sip and looked at the room full of people looking at her work and felt something vast and clear. I reminded him that that's my call to make, not his. Not yours either. He was quiet. Is that going to be a problem? She asked. With him? With you. He looked at her, that full, specific gaze, and said, no. Good, she said. Because I spent a month being handled, and I'm done with it. I know, he said. I'm also, she said, more quietly, not going anywhere. His hand found hers at her side. Not claiming. Just, present. I know that too, he said. 3 weeks later, Ezio came to the apartment with a folder. Not a folder with her name on it this time. This one had a property address. What is this? She said. A building in Los Feliz, he said. Ground floor is a gallery space. Second and third floor are residential. Currently empty. He paused. It's yours, if you want it. She looked at the folder. Ezio. Not a cage, he said, before she could say it. No conditions. Your name on the deed, no connection to the Ferrante family in any document. A building where you can show your work and live in a space that's actually yours, and where the north-facing light is, he turned a page, I'm told significantly better than your current windows. She looked at the photo on the specification sheet. The windows were floor to ceiling and faced exactly north. This isn't about keeping me close, she said. Is it? No. It's about, he stopped. Reorganized again. She'd noticed he did this when he was saying something true that didn't have a practiced version. You told me you're not going anywhere. I wanted you to have somewhere to be that was entirely yours. No part of me in it except the choice to give it. She looked at him for a long time. Come look at the space with me, she said. Before I decide. Of course. And if the north light is as good as the photograph? It is. Then I'll think about it. He almost smiled again. She was collecting these, his almost smiles, the door-opening moments, the times the architecture of him let the light through. Think fast, he said. Someone else has made an offer. You'd outbid them. Immediately. So the think fast is theater. The north light, he said, really is exceptional. The opening of Serafina Andolini's first solo gallery show happened on a warm October evening in Los Feliz, in a space with north-facing windows that threw the most extraordinary light she'd ever worked in, in a building that had her name on the deed and a studio on the third floor where she sometimes worked until 3 in the morning and could see the city spread out below her like a map of everything she'd survived. The Times called it an emergence. A museum in New York expressed interest in 2 pieces. The collector with the long name bought 3. Camille wore a dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion and cried, briefly, in the bathroom, and then denied it thoroughly and made Serafina take 17 photographs of her in front of the centerpiece. The centerpiece was new. Not Malibu canvas, that one hung in the Bel Air compound now, in Ezio's study, in the place where the Caravaggio had been, and when she'd noticed the Caravaggio's absence and asked about it he'd said he'd moved it, and when she'd asked where, he'd said it seemed right that something real should be there instead, and she'd spent approximately 4 minutes trying to find a response to that before giving up. The new centerpiece was a portrait, of a kind. Not a face. She didn't paint faces, her training was in abstraction, in feeling, in the translation of interior states into color and shape. But it was unmistakably a portrait, in the way that some portraits don't look like their subjects and are true anyway. Sea glass after a storm. The deep, impossible green of it. A door, open. Light coming through from a direction that shouldn't have been possible, couldn't have been possible, but was, definitively, inexplicably, there. The Caravaggio trick, the Times critic would write, the light that had no logical source and somehow illuminated everything. Serafina stood in front of it with a glass of wine she wasn't drinking and felt people moving around her in the warm gallery and thought about the night in the alley and the 45-minute drive and the north-facing light and Camille's voice saying "Are you safe?" and the terrace with the city below and the hand over hers on the railing. She thought about a folder with her name on it and a man who had planned to use her and had stopped. She thought about Marco Castellano looking at her painting and telling her he saw something that wanted to be controlled. She thought about what she'd painted instead, what she'd known even then was the truer story, the moment after the storm. Resolution. The held breath released. She felt him before she saw him, that warmth, that specific presence, moving through the crowded room toward her. He stopped at her shoulder. He looked at the painting. "Sea glass," he said. "Yes." "After a storm." "Yes." "You should have said it was a self-portrait," he said. The Times would have had opinions. "It's not a self-portrait," she said. "A beat." "No," he said. "I know." He put his hand on her back, light, not possessive, present, and she leaned into it by a millimeter that neither of them acknowledged and both of them felt. "Happy?" he said. She looked at her work on the walls, at Camille laughing, at the room full of people who'd come to see what she'd made, at the north light that even in the evening, even with the artificial gallery lighting, still managed to be doing something extraordinary. "Yes," she said. "Good," he said. Outside, the city was doing its irresponsible best with the October sky, going amber and then rose and then the deep, particular blue of a door about to open, and Serafina Andolini was standing in a room that was hers, beside a man she'd chosen deliberately and with full knowledge of the cost, and every painting on the wall was a feeling she'd survived long enough to name. She raised her glass. Not to him. Not to the room. To herself. To the before ending and the after, visible at last. If you made it here, if you stayed for all of it, the alley and the compound and the folder and Vegas and everything that came after, then you already know something that most people spend their whole lives trying to figure out. That the most dangerous thing isn't loving someone in a dark world. It's loving yourself enough to know the difference between a cage and a choice. Between being kept and choosing to stay. Serafina walked into every room in this story with her eyes open. She made mistakes and she made demands and she made art, and she never let anyone, not the Castellanos, not the man she was falling for, not even herself, reduce her to the thing that happened to her. If this story found you, share it. If it moved you, subscribe and tell me in the comments which moment broke you open. And if you've ever stood in a room full of your own survival and realized it was beautiful, you know exactly what this ending means. This isn't over. Some stories just reach a place where they don't need to keep bleeding to keep being true.